Hello, my name is Guy Sold from SME Solicitors. I'm a partner in the firm and the head of the employment department. I'm going to be talking about fire and rehire, which has been very much en vogue in the news recently. What is the meaning of this? A lot of people refer to the P&O Ferries case concerning this. For the reasons that I'll explain in a moment, that isn't really fire and rehire, but it's what led to changes being made. In the P&O Ferries case, a number of employees, I think around 340 or so, were dismissed without notice or consultation. There was uproar from unions and in the press, and even from the government itself. Fire and rehire is when terms and conditions of employees are changed and the employees refuse the change and they are dismissed as a result, or they're required by an employer to agree the change and are dismissed. Once they are dismissed, they are offered re-engagement on new terms, but those new terms are the same as those that they turned down in the first place. In the P&O case, what happened was they simply dismissed employees but didn't offer the jobs back to them on the new terms they were talking about. So it wasn't a rehire, it was effectively no hire. And they instead engaged agency workers who were cheaper to carry out the work that the employees were formerly carrying out. So what is the risk to the employer in these circumstances if they operate a policy of fire and rehire? Well, there is a risk of an unfair dismissal claim. There are 5 potential fair reasons for dismissal, and generally speaking, if an employee is dismissed in these circumstances, it will either be under a potential fair reason of redundancy or what is known as some other substantial reason, or SOSR, S-O-S-R. If an employer can show that there are sound business reasons for operating the policy that it has in relation to fire and rehire, then the employee's contractual rights not to have the terms and conditions of employment change without their consent are overridden. However, if an employee is able to show that they have been unfairly dismissed, what is the level of their claim? Normally, an employee would have 2 aspects to an award. One, a basic award, which is calculated in the same way as a statutory redundancy payment, generally speaking, and a compensatory award. The compensatory award compensates them for their net loss of income from the last day of their employment until they get another job, generally speaking. An employee has a duty to mitigate his or her loss. By failing to accept the new terms, it can be argued that the employee has failed to mitigate their loss because they've turned down another job. If the difference between the new terms and the old terms is very small, they may have very little loss at all. In the P&O case, was it a redundancy situation? You may think, well, those jobs still exist, so how can it be? Well, in fact, it was still a redundancy situation because of the definitions, there are 3, of redundancy within the legislation. Even though those employees' jobs were filled by contractors, there was still a reduction in the requirement for employees, and I emphasize employees, to carry out work of a particular kind. There was quite a high-profile case last year involving Tesco, where they fired employees and rehired them, so a proper fire and rehire, to remove a contractual entitlement to enhanced pay. That enhanced pay was supposed to remain in place, the employees thought, for the entirety of their employment until they were no longer working for Tesco. USDOR, the union, on behalf of the Tesco workers, applied to the High Court for an injunction to stop the employer dismissing all the employees. The High Court granted that injunction. However, the case went to the Court of Appeal and the Court of Appeal overturned the decision, effectively saying Tesco could operate fire and rehire in these circumstances quite legitimately. So what does the future hold? There was a lot in the press at the time of the P&O case, of the government doing something about it to stop this happening in the future. Clearly it's quite a draconian measure, so that is understandable. However, businesses often say, well, we should be able to do what we can under the law as it exists in order to save the business and therefore at least save some employees' jobs and not having to close the business down and lose lots of employees' jobs. ACAS was asked by the government to investigate the situation, and in February 2021 ACAS produced its report. The government held on to this report for 4 months before publishing it, so it didn't come out until June 2021. As a result of that report, ACAS published non-statutory guidance, so it's not binding, in November 2021. Within that non-statutory guidance, ACAS stated that employers should consult fully with employees when contractual changes are proposed in order to make every effort to reach agreement with the employees concerned. The ACAS non-statutory guidance also stated that fire and rehire was an extreme step and therefore damaged morale, affected productivity badly, and damaged working relations. In February of last year, February 2022, the government stated that it had no plans to legislate to change the situation. The following month, in March 2022, the government announced there would in fact be a new statutory code of practice. This is not yet in force and is not yet in its final form. This new statutory code of practice, ironically, will be introduced due to the P&O case, even though, as I mentioned earlier, the P&O case is not actually a fire and rehire case. The new statutory code of practice has been produced in draft form, and representations are being sought from various bodies with regard to the contents, including trade unions. The document for consultation was produced in the last few days. It's rather a long document, so I'm not going to go through it in its entirety, but let's just pick out some important points from it. So what does it include? It states that employers need to hold fair, transparent and meaningful consultation on proposed changes. It sets out practical steps in relation to what procedure employers should follow. The consultation document also recommends that if an agreement is not reached with the employees, then the employer actually goes back and re-examines its business strategy. Furthermore, if there are multiple changes to the terms and conditions of employment proposed, it's recommended that the employer considers bringing them in over a period of time rather than all in one go. It is important for employers to note that there is also a penalty provided within the consultation document should employers fail to follow the code. This is similar to that which operates, for example, in relation to unfair dismissal processes when there is the ACAS Code of Practice on disciplinary and grievance procedures. Any tribunal hearing a case in relation to a fire and rehire process therefore has to take into account the code. If a tribunal decides that there is an unreasonable failure to follow the code by the employer and subsequently makes an award to an employee for unfair dismissal, it can increase the level of compensation awarded to an employee by up to 25% if the code has not been followed and the failure is unreasonable. So, just to emphasise, this document is only out for consultation at the moment, so there may yet be changes before it becomes law. However, there is a lot of consultation to take place and a lot of that will be with unions, so personally I would be surprised if there are many changes when it becomes law. If you want to have more information about what you've heard me talk about, then please contact us. The same applies if you want a copy of the slides.